This story comes from when I was around 16 years old. The events that took place still haunt me, and I remain uneasy in the dark no matter where I go. I fear that what happened in that house could happen again someday. One day, my father decided to bring a spiritual medium into our home to try and connect with relatives who had passed away. My mother strongly opposed this idea. At the time, I thought it was a good idea because I longed for closure with some of my lost family members. When I was 9, I once woke up in the middle of the night in a panic. I didn't understand why, but I was overwhelmed with a sense of dread. I stayed awake for over an hour, unable to shake the feeling that something terrible was happening. Eventually, I forced myself to go back to sleep. The next morning, I learned that my uncle had died in a freak accident that night. I was devastated. I cried so hard that I almost made myself sick. It wasn't just grief. I somehow knew something bad was coming but had no way of knowing what it was or who it would affect. It made me feel like I was responsible, even though that made no sense. Years later, I realized the time I woke up in a panic matched the time he passed away. That wasn't the only time I had a premonition. At 13, I was at school the day before Valentine's Day. Our classes were having fun with candy and movies, but I felt a deep sadness I couldn't explain. It felt like someone was watching me, and I spent the whole day feeling out of place. After school, my mom picked me and my twin brother up. Something felt off because instead of heading home, she drove toward my grandmother's house, something we usually only did on weekends. I immediately asked what was wrong, but she wouldn't tell me. She just kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror. When we were only a block away, I heard my grandfather whisper my name. I knew right then that he was gone. He had been in the hospital fighting late-stage spinal cancer, and I just knew he had passed. I held back my tears because I wasn't entirely sure, and I didn't want to seem like I was imagining things. My brother didn't suspect anything. When we arrived, my father confirmed what I already knew. My grandfather had died. Everyone was heartbroken, including me, but I still didn't cry. I could feel that he didn't want us to be sad. He had been in so much pain for the past year, and I knew he was finally at peace. My dad was confused as to why I wasn't grieving. He asked if I was okay, and I told him that I had already known. Everyone looked at me strangely, except for my mother. My dad demanded to know who had told me, but I explained that no one had. I just knew. I told them about my feelings that day and about hearing his voice, but my father didn't believe me. He assumed my mother had told me, but when he asked my brother if he knew, my brother said he had no idea, proving that my mom had told us nothing. About 3 months later, I had an incredibly vivid dream of my grandfather. I believe it was his way of saying goodbye since I hadn't seen him for months before he passed. These experiences made me eager to participate when my father hired the medium. I desperately wanted closure. However, my mother refused to let my siblings or me stay in the house during the session. She insisted it wasn't safe and that it would be bad for us. At the time, I didn't realize how right she was. I begged to have my own session, but she wouldn't budge. Looking back, I'm so grateful she refused. What happened afterward was terrifying enough. I can't imagine what would have happened if I had actually connected with something. After the medium left, everything seemed fine at first. But 2 weeks later, an infestation of flies appeared on the second floor, clustering on a single kitchen window. There were hundreds of them, large, almost the size of horseflies. They buzzed so loudly that they sounded like cicadas. We had no idea where they came from. By the next day, most were dead, and the rest vanished. At the time, we didn't understand the significance of this, but I now believe that's when the portal opened. From then on, I began seeing and hearing strange things in the house. It started with a shadow figure in the corner of my bedroom. It was massive, nearly reaching the door frame. It only appeared in the dark as if trying to blend in, but I always knew it was there. I could feel its gaze, filled with anger. It was aware that I could see it, and that seemed to enrage it. Every night, my dreams became nightmares, and I could hear a furious voice screaming, "Get out! Get out!" Hoping to protect myself, I placed a cross under my bed, one my grandfather had given me. But after 3 nights, the cross disappeared without a trace. I searched everywhere, moving my bed and dresser, but it was gone. That loss devastated me. Afterward, the shadow figure followed me everywhere. I saw it from the corner of my eye, always just behind me. I also started experiencing frequent sleep paralysis, though I never saw the figure during those moments. It would take nearly a minute to move any part of my body. It happened so often that I developed a routine to break free faster. The scariest experience happened when I was home alone with our 3 dogs. I heard heavy footsteps upstairs and grabbed a bat we kept by the front door. My most loyal dog, a terrier mix, stayed by my side as we searched every room, but no one was there. As I headed back downstairs, a loud crash startled me. The other dogs barked furiously. Running into the kitchen, I found them forming a circle, barking at something on the floor. In the center lay a coffee cup, its contents still swirling inside as if it had just been set down. Relieved it hadn't shattered, I picked it up and turned toward the sink. The moment I did, the stairwell door, which never closed properly, slammed shut behind me. Terrified, I threw the cup in the sink, grabbed the dogs, and ran outside. I couldn't stay in that house alone any longer. I feared that if I did, something would harm me. 2 years later, we moved out. My dad and his girlfriend experienced some strange things after we left, but nothing compared to what I endured. When I finally told my father everything, he felt guilty. He admitted that if he had known the consequences, he never would have hired the medium. From what I've heard, no one stays in that house for long. I believe the portal remains open. Since moving, I haven't had any more nightmares or sleep paralysis. I believe the medium never properly closed the connection. My advice? Never invite something like that into your home. You never know what you might let in or what might decide to stay. I've lived my whole life in a secluded valley nestled deep within the Blue Ridge Mountains, a place where rolling hills and steep inclines shape the landscape and where everybody knows everyone. Or at least, they know a story about everyone. My family has been rooted here for generations, our name intertwined with the winding trails, creeks, and abandoned cabins that the land. As a child, I spent most of my time outdoors. Fishing, hiking, and hunting were second nature to me. My grandfather introduced me to the foothills before I could even read, teaching me how to track wildlife by the prints left in the mud or tufts of fur snagged on branches. By the time I was old enough to explore alone, I would disappear into the forests for hours, never giving much thought to the eerie tales locals whispered around campfires. Stories of strange figures glimpsed at dusk, lights flickering on the ridgelines with no source, and whispers that carried on the wind were common. Some people claimed to hear distant chanting, while others stumbled upon footprints that didn't belong to any known animal. I always listened with mild amusement. The woods play tricks on people. Rustling leaves could sound like footsteps, and shadows could morph into imagined monsters if you were already on edge. I believed everything had a logical explanation. At least, that was until one particular autumn evening made me question everything I thought I knew. It was a crisp Saturday, the air carrying the scent of decaying leaves. The forests had already begun their transformation into gold, crimson, and amber. I set out on a hike to an old ridgeline I called Twin Pines Bluff. My friends and I had given it that name as kids, after the 2 enormous pine trees standing tall near the summit. My goal was to capture some pictures of the fall foliage before the season passed and maybe even catch the sunset. I packed light and followed a familiar route, one that wound along an overgrown logging road before connecting to a steep path leading toward the peak. It was a trail I had taken countless times before. The first few hours were peaceful, the silence only interrupted by the rustling of squirrels darting through the underbrush. Eventually, the forest grew denser, the canopy overhead filtering out the sunlight. A cool mist wove through the trees, a common phenomenon in these mountains during the fall. Even though I'd spent my life here, the sudden hush always unsettled me. Every snapped twig beneath my boot seemed unnaturally loud. I stopped to take a sip of coffee, using a moss-covered rock as a seat, reminding myself that the woods weren't haunted. They were just quiet. Then I saw something. At first, it was just movement out of the corner of my eye, something shifting between the trees. I assumed it was a bear. I caught the briefest glimpse of a dark limb before it vanished into the undergrowth. Shrugging it off, I continued walking, making a mental note to steer clear if I spotted it again. About a half-mile further, I noticed something strange lying across the trail, a pile of broken branches. They weren't scattered randomly but arranged almost deliberately, as if forming a crude barrier. There were no saw marks or clean cuts. The limbs appeared to have been snapped and twisted by force. I glanced up, expecting to see broken branches above me, but the surrounding trees were intact. It wasn't the work of wind or falling limbs. These had been gathered and placed there. It was odd, but I stepped around it and moved on, resisting the urge to disturb the arrangement. The sky had begun to darken by the time I reached the open ridgeline. A haze clung to the valleys below, making it difficult to see beyond a mile. That's when I noticed it, a figure standing at the crest of the next slope, about 70 yards ahead. It was tall, unnaturally so, lean and draped in tattered dark fabric or perhaps something resembling fur. It was hunched, its posture just slightly wrong. I tried to rationalize it. A lost hiker, a hunter wearing camouflage, but the way it moved unsettled me. It took a step, then another, gliding with an eerie fluidity, vanishing behind a cluster of mountain laurel. I stood frozen. Logic told me I should turn back, but stubborn curiosity compelled me forward. What if it was just some recluse living off the land? What if, by getting a closer look, I could put my fears to rest? Against my better judgment, I followed. The woods grew darker as I ascended, the ground turning treacherous with damp leaves and loose stones. I found no footprints, just subtle disturbances in the forest floor, as though something had passed through without truly touching the ground. Eventually, I reached a clearing, a small hollow encircled by gnarled oaks. At the center, a moss-covered stone jutted from the earth. The air was unnaturally still. No birds, no wind, just silence. Then I saw it again, crouched at the far edge of the clearing near the base of an old oak. Its elongated form was partially obscured by shadows. It turned toward me, and though I couldn't make out a face, I knew it was watching. A deep, gnawing instinct told me to run, but something else, a morbid fascination, kept me rooted in place. I took a cautious step forward. The figure sprang to its feet. It made no sound, yet its movement was impossibly quick, vanishing into the trees with inhuman grace. My heart pounded as I gave chase, ignoring every rational thought screaming at me to turn around. I stumbled over roots, branches whipping at my arms, but I couldn't keep up. Within seconds, it was gone. The realization that I was alone, deep in the forest with nightfall approaching, finally sank in. Rain began to fall, and the last slivers of daylight faded behind thick clouds. I hesitated only a moment before making the decision to head back. The descent was treacherous. The ground was slick, and several times I nearly lost my footing. The oppressive feeling of being watched never left me. Every rustling leaf, every shifting shadow felt like unseen eyes tracking my retreat. At long last, I emerged onto the narrow country road that led home. My clothes were soaked, my legs aching from the frantic descent, but I didn't stop moving until I was safely inside my house. That night, I couldn't sleep. Nightmares plagued me. Visions of standing at the edge of the hollow, peering into darkness, only to see two pale eyes staring back. Sometimes, the dream shifted, and I was the one curled up in that hollow, while the tall, silent figure loomed over me, deciding my fate. People say these mountains hold secrets, that they are older than our towns, older than the roads that carve through them. I used to think it was just folklore. Now, I'm not so sure. Maybe I glimpsed one of those secrets that day. Something that doesn't want to be found. Something that moves quietly among the ridges, watching from the cover of the trees. A word of advice. If you ever see something lurking in the woods, something just beyond explanation, don't chase it. Some things are meant to remain unseen. I'll start by saying that I never believed in ghosts or anything supernatural, Yet the things I'm about to share have been happening to me since around 2011. My wife is really into spooky stories, and she suggested I share my experiences here to see if anyone else has gone through something similar or might have an explanation. I'm Jake, and I'm from a small town in Georgia. The first time I saw her was during my last year of high school. I call her her because I don't know who the woman is, and at first, she only appeared in my dreams. It was around May of 2011, and like any senior, I was excited to graduate and start my life. My parents had split up when I was in elementary school, so I lived with my mom and visited my dad on weekends. My older sister, who was 7 years older than me, had already moved out by then. During my last year of high school, I moved in with my dad because his house was closer to school and my job. He had remarried, and my stepmom had 2 kids, a daughter who was a couple of years older than me and a son who was almost my exact age. My stepbrother and I shared a room, but he was usually out with friends or his girlfriend, so I had the space to myself most nights. One Friday night, my stepbrother was staying over at a friend's house. After working late until 11 p.m., I came home, took a shower, and collapsed onto my bed. I remember falling asleep with the light on. Then I started to dream, but it wasn't like a normal dream. Felt way too real. In it, I was in my high school gym walking toward the locker room. I heard someone crying and followed the sound into the shower area. All the showers were on, and in the middle of them stood a girl with long black hair covering her face, sobbing. My first thought was, why is there a girl in the boys' locker room? But I kept walking forward. I reached out and put my hand on her shoulder, and the second I touched her, she snapped upright. Her eyes weren't there, just empty, dark sockets. I stumbled backward in horror and woke up in an instant. I shot up so fast I almost fell out of bed. That's when I realized my room was completely dark. But I knew for a fact I had left the light on before falling asleep. My heart started pounding. I stood up, and across the room, I saw a dark figure. I couldn't make out any details except for its long hair. I tried flipping the light switch, but it wouldn't turn on. I even pinched myself to make sure I wasn't dreaming, but the figure just stood there. I stayed awake until morning, too scared to close my eyes again. Years later, I had my own apartment with my now wife. We shared a king-size bed with our 2 dogs, which usually meant I had just a tiny spot to sleep on. One night around 3 a.m., I got up to use the bathroom. When I came back, I climbed into bed and turned to face the wall, which was also the direction of our slightly open bedroom door. We kept it cracked for the dogs. It was dark, but I opened my eyes just a little, and there she was again, right next to my bed. Her long hair covered her face as she hovered over me. I jumped up so fast that I accidentally knocked our little Yorkie off the bed. I felt awful about that later. I turned on the light, waking up my wife and our other dog, a big husky. The moment the light came on, the woman was gone. My wife, who already believed in supernatural stuff, asked me what happened. I told her everything, and we both stayed awake for the rest of the night, shaken. The last time I saw her was the worst. It was December of 2023. I work a night shift about 40 minutes away from home. My wife also works nights, but in a different section of the factory, so we usually drive home together. That night, she was sick and had to stay home, which meant I had to drive alone. There's a long back road I have to take to get to work. About halfway through, I reached a place we call Twin Bridges, 2 small bridges that cross a deep river. My wife hates that spot at night and always closes her eyes until we've passed, but I never minded it. Until that night, something felt off, but I figured it was just because my usual routine was different. I crossed the first bridge without anything happening, but as I got closer to the second, I saw someone standing in the middle of the road. I slowed down, thinking maybe someone's car had broken down, but there was no car anywhere. As I got closer, I realized it was her. This time, I saw her face. Her mouth was open like she was screaming, but no sound came out. A wave of terror hit me, and I slammed my foot on the gas. As I sped past her, I heard the most horrifying scream I've ever heard, like a mix of a wild animal and something not from this world. I didn't stop driving until I made it to work. I called my wife the second I got there. That whole night, Every little noise made me jump. The next morning, I had to drive home alone, but at least it was daytime. I crossed those bridges as fast as I could. I haven't seen her since, but my anxiety is through the roof because there's no pattern to when she appears. The dream was one thing, but seeing her in my room and then hearing that blood-curdling scream was something else entirely. Who is she? What does she want from me? Has anyone else ever experienced something like this? I just want her to leave me alone. This event took place about 6 or 7 years ago. I must have been around 13 or 14 at the time. I live in central Indiana, an area that's not quite as densely wooded as the southern part of the state, but not as developed as the northern cities. Somewhere in between, with scattered towns, fields, and patches of forest. To set the scene, I lived in a mobile home park along a road that was roughly 2 miles away from the nearest town, making it feel pretty remote. Running alongside the road next to the park were 2 drainage ditches. One of them extended for about 50 yards before stopping at one entrance, while the second, much larger ditch started at another entrance. This bigger ditch started narrow and then opened up into a small pond toward the back of the neighborhood. Near that ditch, there was a stretch of woods, really just a 200-yard-long trail flanked by trees on both sides, connecting the edge of the park to the road. My older brother had lived there with our grandfather when he was younger and would tell me creepy stories about that wooded area. Unsettling noises, odd things found buried in the dirt. He even claimed once that he had uncovered a human skull, though I always suspected he just said that to scare me. He also described a shadowy figure that was rumored to haunt those woods, saying it might be tied to old land from the past, possibly cursed. Now that you have an idea of the place and its history, here's what happened. It was a warm, overcast autumn afternoon with strong winds. My friend Jake and I often played outside, acting out army scenarios using sticks as pretend rifles. We never had fancy toy weapons, so we relied on our imagination. The mobile home park had quite a few abandoned, run-down trailers that had been left standing, making it a fun but eerie place to explore. Anyone who has ever played with stick guns knows how hard it is to find the perfect one. When you do, you make sure to keep it safe from breaking. On that particular day, I had found a great one, perfect for a rifle, but Jake was struggling to find one large enough to be his machine gun. We had no luck searching around the park, so he suggested we check the woods. Normally, we avoided those trees because they felt unsettling, and the sticks there were usually too oddly shaped or brittle to use. But that day, we figured it was worth a look. As we stepped onto the trail, I immediately noticed a change in the air. Felt heavy, as if we weren't supposed to be there, like we were intruding. The wind picked up, and since it was late fall, most of the leaves were gone. The towering poplar trees around us made eerie whistling sounds in the wind, adding to the unease. We walked about halfway down the path, eyes scanning the ground for decent sticks. I wasn't picking up much because I was distracted by the gnawing feeling that we should leave. I couldn't put my finger on why, but something just felt wrong. Jake, on the other hand, was determined, digging through every pile of fallen branches to find the perfect weapon. There's one small but important detail I should mention. About halfway down the trail, to the right, there was a little secluded area we called the island. Thick shrubs and thorny bushes separated it from the rest of the path. As Jake rummaged through the debris near that spot, we both suddenly noticed something strange. The usual forest sounds had gone completely silent. No birds, no rustling, nothing. Then we saw it. A few yards ahead, some low-hanging branches started shaking violently, as if someone was forcefully yanking them. Then came the sound of crunching leaves, about 20 feet to my right. My head snapped in that direction, and that's when I saw it. A hunched, shadowy figure. It wasn't transparent, but completely solid, jet black with a distinct slouched posture. Its arms stretched awkwardly in front of it, and its hands dangled at the wrists, like the front paws of an animal. It moved quickly in a bizarre, tiptoeing manner, barreling through trees and brush as if they weren't even there. It had a purpose. It was coming straight for us. The second I registered what I was looking at, panic took over. I slapped Jake on the shoulder and bolted, yelling, "Run!" I barely heard what he shouted in response. My only thought was getting out of those woods as fast as possible. We tore through the underbrush, stumbling over roots, pushing past branches, sprinting towards safety. When we finally burst out of the woods, I collapsed against a tree, gasping for breath. About half a minute later, Jake came crashing out of the trail, just as winded and confused about why I had taken off so suddenly. I told him what I had seen. His face went pale. He said he had stopped to catch his breath for a second on the way out, and in that brief moment, he swore he had heard something closing in on him. He managed to glance back and saw a dark shape moving. Not fast, but somehow covering ground unnaturally quickly. He couldn't explain it, and I didn't ask him to try. To this day, we don't know what we encountered in those woods, but we're convinced that stretch of land, at least that particular strip of trees, is either cursed or home to something that doesn't take kindly to visitors. Whatever it was, it made its message very clear. We were not welcome. When I was much younger, I had a close friend I spent countless hours with. He lived in an old-fashioned house in our town. Dark wooden paneling, stone walls in the basement, and an unsettling silence that always lingered. Something about that house never felt right to me, but as a kid, I didn't have the words to explain the discomfort it gave me. 2 moments from my time there stand out vividly in my mind, leaving me with a deep sense of unease that has never faded. The first event happened one afternoon while I was hanging out with my friend in his living room. Near the entrance was an aged painting hanging on the wall. I'd walked past it plenty of times, but for some reason, that day I felt drawn to it. I found myself staring at it, unable to look away, without knowing why. The painting showed a young boy sitting on a wooden rocking horse, smiling. One arm rested on the horse while the other was raised near his head. Something about it felt wrong. Then, I noticed an air bubble in the paint, right where the boy's hand was. The bubble was shaped exactly like a blade. It wasn't part of the artwork. It was raised, as if something had been pressed into the surface after it was painted. I pointed it out to my friend, and we both stared at it in silence. At first, I thought it was just a quirk of age, a random imperfection, but it seemed too intentional, too precise in both shape and placement. My friend just shrugged and said, "Weird things like that always happen here. I'm used to it." That comment unsettled me, but I forced myself to ignore it. Later, my mom picked me up, and I left, trying to push the whole thing out of my mind. But when I returned the next day, the odd mark on the painting was completely gone, like it had never been there. Even worse, the boy's face had changed. He no longer had a cheerful expression. His features looked blank now, like he was posing for a stiff, somber portrait. I still have no explanation for it, but I remember how it made me feel, like something in that house had shifted, watching us. Years later, I ended up babysitting in that same house one evening. I was in the living room with the younger child I was watching, lost in a movie, when suddenly, I heard the upstairs doors slam shut, one after another. Bang, bang, bang. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't a random draft. It was too forceful, too deliberate. Normally, I would have run straight out of there. I've never been the brave type, but I couldn't just abandon the kid. Summoning every ounce of courage I had, I crept upstairs, flipping on every light as I went. To my shock, all the doors stood wide open. None of it made sense. I let out a breath, trying to steady myself, until I saw the family's dog. He was standing stiffly by the front door, locked in place, staring outside. His ears were pinned back, his whole body tensed, and then he let out a low, fearful growl. Not an aggressive one filled with pure fear. That's when I noticed the basement door. It had a small window which lined up with a larger window leading outside. And for some reason, I found myself looking in that direction. That's when I saw it. A boy's face. It was only there for a split second, but it wasn't someone peering in from outside. No, it was just a face, floating, detached from any body. The eyes were angled upward, as if the rest of him were buried beneath the ground. And then it was gone. Not like it moved away, not like it disappeared into the night. It just ceased to exist. couldn't breathe. Every hair on my body stood on end. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. Maybe it wasn't real. But deep down, I had the terrible, unshakable feeling that the boy from the painting had returned. After that night, I made sure never to spend too much time in that house again. That eerie feeling never left me. Something was there, and it wasn't just my friend or his family. To this day, I still wonder who or what had been living there with them all along. Growing up in the Blue Ridge Mountains, I was always warned about the old trails. Some were safe, well-trodden routes that led to breathtaking views. Others, my grandfather used to say, were abandoned for a reason. When I was 17, my friends and I decided to take a shortcut through one of those neglected trails to reach our campsite before nightfall. It was barely recognizable as a path, overgrown with weeds and twisted roots, but we laughed off my grandfather's warnings and pressed on. The deeper we ventured, the quieter the woods became. The usual chatter of birds fell silent, and even the rustling leaves seemed to hold their breath. Then we noticed strange carvings on the trees, symbols scratched deep into the bark. Some were fresh, while others had faded with time. They formed spirals, circles, and eerie figures with unnaturally long limbs, all pointing in the same direction, forward. By the time we realized we were lost, the last sliver of sunlight had disappeared behind the peaks. That's when we heard it, the whispering. At first, it blended with the wind, soft and distant. Then, it became clearer, voices murmuring just beyond the glow of our flashlights. We called out, thinking maybe someone was playing a prank on us, but there was no response. Only more whispers, and they were moving. Panic set in. We turned back, but the path had changed. It was narrower now, the trees closer together, their shadows stretching long and unnatural. The carvings had changed too. No longer abstract symbols, they now showed human-like figures with hollow eyes and open, screaming mouths. Then we saw them, shapes standing in the trees, tall, thin, barely visible. Every time we tried to focus, they seemed to shift like they were just beyond our understanding. One of them moved toward us. My friend let out a terrified scream and ran. We all followed, crashing blindly through the underbrush, our only thought to escape. The whispers turned to laughter, distorted and mocking, as if they knew we would never outrun them. Somehow, we burst out onto an old dirt road. When we turned back, the path was gone. No opening in the trees, no sign we had ever been there. One of my friends changed after that night. He withdrew from us, barely spoke, and a year later, he moved away without a word. I tried to forget, but just last week, I went hiking with my girlfriend. Near our cabin, I spotted something carved into a tree, one of those same symbols, freshly cut. Below it, in jagged, uneven letters, was what looked like my name. I don't think we were meant to leave that night, and I don't think they ever stopped watching. A few nights later, I heard something outside the cabin. At first, I told myself it was just the wind or a shifting branch. But then I heard it again, the same whispering, just outside the window. I lay frozen, barely breathing. My girlfriend slept beside me, unaware. Slowly, I turned my head. Through the thin curtain, I could make out a shape, tall, motionless, standing at the tree line, watching. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to believe it wasn't real, that I was imagining things. The next morning, I found footprints in the dirt outside, but they weren't normal. They were long, warped, like whatever had been out there wasn't entirely human, but was trying to be. The ground around a nearby tree was disturbed, and carved into its bark was a new message. You left. We remember. I didn't tell my girlfriend. I didn't want to scare her, and I didn't know what they wanted. That night, we packed our things and left. I pray I never hear them again.